Banquets in ancient Greece. In the heart of ancient Greece, banquets weren't just about gathering for food and drink. They were complex performances of power and influence, where every detail mattered. The host didn't just randomly select his guests, and seating arrangements were crucial. Sitting far from the host? Well, that was a clear indication you weren't the star of the evening. Sitting right beside him? That was practically an invitation to solidify alliances, or at the very least, to request a favor down the line. Banquets reflected the very fabric of Greek social hierarchy, and were designed to reinforce it. Picture yourself at one of these feasts, surrounded by philosophers, warriors, and politicians, all paying close attention to every word and gesture. You might think you've made an offhand comment, but to the man sitting to your left, it might signal that you're plotting a coup to dethrone the ruler of Sparta. There was always a faint whiff of conspiracy in the air, and alliances that seemed impossible at the beginning of the night could materialize before dessert. It wasn't just about exotic delicacies or an abundance of wine. These events were social battlegrounds where the elite made their moves. Being invited to a banquet could either strengthen a friendship, or, let's be real, it could be the start of a rivalry that would last decades. You know the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer? Well, in ancient Greece, the best way to do that was to seat them right next to you at dinner. Furthermore, both public and private banquets were perfect opportunities for hosts to flaunt their wealth and connections. The amount of meat served, or the type of wine offered, often revealed not just how deep the host's pockets were, but also how strong his political alliances were. And of course, nothing came free. Accepting an invitation was an implicit agreement to a future favor, and rejecting one, well, that was practically a declaration of war. So next time you're at an elegant dinner party, remember, your table might seem peaceful, but who knows what kind of plans are being whispered over the wine glass across the room. Status and hierarchy at the table. If the Greeks knew one thing, it was how to organize a seating chart. Banquets were highly orchestrated events where the host didn't just serve lavish dishes, he also established a clear social hierarchy visible to all. Sitting far from the host? Sorry, but you're definitely not in the spotlight tonight. Sitting beside him? Now that's prime real estate, and it could mean the beginning of new political ties, or at least securing a future favor. Seating at the banquet table wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a direct reflection of one's position in the social hierarchy. Today we might feel a bit slighted if we're seated far from the birthday guest, but imagine what it meant in ancient Greece to be placed on the wrong end of the table. It wasn't just a seating faux pas, it was a subtle but very clear reminder of where you really stood in society. The selection of guests was an art form in itself. The host needed to ensure that every guest had something to gain or lose from their interactions with each other. After all, the ultimate goal of a banquet wasn't just to have a pleasant evening. It was to use the banquet as a chessboard for social and political maneuvers. Inviting or leaving someone off the guest list could be interpreted as a political statement, and everyone knew it. However, it wasn't just the host who had to play his cards right. The guests, too, were acutely aware that every word spoken, every glass raised, could either advance their status or destroy carefully built reputations. A careless remark, a poorly timed joke, or even a misplaced toast could bring years of social positioning crashing down. Navigating the conversations at a banquet required near diplomatic skills, as the wrong word could easily sink you in a sea of rivals. In essence, Greek banquets were power games disguised as friendly gatherings. Every seating arrangement, every interaction, and even the food served was a carefully orchestrated part of the event. Sure, the food was delicious, but the real feast? Politics, served on a silver platter. Types of banquets. In ancient Greece, banquets weren't all the same. They came in different forms, each with its own purpose. On one side, you had the public banquets, grand, open events that catered to a larger audience. These were typically held to celebrate military victories or during religue. Picture it as the ancient version of a victory parade, only with more food, wine, and philosophical discussions. Everyone who was anyone in the city could be invited, and the goal was to showcase unity, civic pride, and of course, the generosity of the ruling elite. Public banquets were the perfect opportunity for the host, often a political leader or a wealthy citizen, to show off his wealth and influence. Think of it like hosting a massive party and inviting the whole town to prove just how well-connected and benevolent you are. But even though it was an open event, don't be fooled. It was still all about power. The elite made sure everyone knew exactly who was in charge. On the other hand, there were the private banquets, which took place in more intimate settings. These were much smaller, highly selective gatherings where the host had complete control over the guest list. In these private settings, the conversations were much deeper and the stakes were much higher. This was where political deals were made, alliances were forged, and occasionally secret betrayals were plotted over wine. Private banquets allowed for candid discussions that wouldn't be appropriate in a more public setting. Here, guests could speak openly about politics, alliances, and yes, even about the occasional plot to unseat a rival. These events were less about public spectacle and more a beau. Picture a smoky back room in a political thriller, only with more togas and ancient wine goblets. In both public and private banquets, the food was just the beginning. Whether it was a grand public affair or a private exclusive gathering, these events carried significant social and political weight. They weren't just meals. They were stages where the drama of Greek life played out, and every encounter carried the potential to change the future. Manipulation, generosity, and expectations. Being the host of a banquet in ancient Greece was no small task. It was practically a form of art. Hosting wasn't just about organizing a meal. It was a delicate performance of influence, manipulation, and, of course, a dash of charm. The success of the banquet depended on the host's ability to please, impress, and, in some cases, subtly control the guests. It was a balancing act, where the goal was not only to provide food and wine, but also to set the stage for strategic conversations and alliances. A skilled host knew that every guest had their own agenda, and part of the host's job was to ensure that the atmosphere was conducive to achieving their own goals. Whether it was brokering a peace deal, securing a political ally, or reminding everyone of their social rank, the host was always playing the long game. And as much as the guests were trying to outmaneuver each other, the host had the ultimate advantage. They controlled the event. But don't be fooled by the appearance of generosity. The hospitality of the host came with strings attached. In Greek society, the concept of da e recebi, give and take, governed social relationships. Being invited to a banquet wasn't just a friendly gesture. It implied a social debt that sooner or later would need to be repaid. Accepting the invitation meant you were in the host's favor, for now. But it also meant that, at some point in the future, the host could call on you for a favor in return. And heaven forbid you refuse an invitation. That was as close to an insult as you could get. In some cases, a declined invitation could signal the breaking of ties or even a declaration of rivalry. For the host, walking this fine line between generosity and manipulation was crucial. They needed to make sure the guests felt valued and appreciated, but not so much that they forgot who was in charge. Each banquet was an opportunity for the host to measure the worth of each guest, assess their usefulness, and set the stage for future favors and alliances. After all, there's no better time to plant the seeds of political strategy than over a well-prepared meal and a perfectly timed toast. So, while the guests were busy enjoying the feast, they were also, often unknowingly, falling deeper into the host's carefully laid web of influence. Because in ancient Greece, the host didn't just serve food, they served their own interests, disguised as hospitality. Food and wine. Ah, food. Whether in the past or present, we all get excited by the sight of a beautifully set table. But in ancient Greece, food at banquets wasn't just about filling your stomach. It was a symbol of power, wealth, and social prestige. Imagine walking into a grand banquet hall, greeted by the sight of tables laden with roast meats, fresh fish, an array of cheeses, honey, and bread that still crackles as it cools. But here's the kicker. Each dish wasn't just there to be devoured. It was also a statement, a deliciously edible symbol of the host's status and connections. For the Greeks, meat was a luxury, a sure sign of wealth. In a time when most of the population ate a diet of grains, legumes, and vegetables, being able to serve meat in abundance showed that you had power and money. Hosting a banquet with plenty of it meant that you weren't just feeding your guests. You were sending them a clear message about your importance. Oh, you think your political alliances are solid? Well, just look at the size of this roast lamb I'm serving. Then there was wine. Now, this was much more than a simple accompaniment to the meal. Wine, to the Greeks, was almost sacred, a drink that had the potential to either reveal your inner truth or make you spill all your political secrets, sometimes both. In fact, wine was considered a facilitator of conversation and diplomacy. The Greeks believed that, in the right amounts, wine could help ease tensions, spark intelligent discussions, and even lead to political breakthroughs. But there was always a balance to be struck. Too little wine, and the evening might feel stiff, the conversations dull. Too much, and suddenly that secret alliance you were forming with the guy across the table? Oops, you just mentioned it aloud. Every cup of wine, every toast could shift the mood of the evening, and that's where the host came in, controlling the flow of wine as skillfully as they controlled the conversation. The Greeks were also very particular about how they served their wine. It was mixed with water. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric. Mixing wine showed civility, restraint, and respect for moderation. But let's be honest, it also allowed the host to keep the guests drinking longer, without anyone passing out too early and missing the late-night political scheming. So when you sat down at a Greek banquet, you weren't just being served a meal. Every dish, every goblet of wine was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that revealed the host's wealth, their strategic intentions, and their ability to influence the people seated at their table. Food was more than sustenance. It was a tool, as sharp as any sword, to wield power. A philosophical feast. If the traditional Greek banquet was all about flaunting wealth and making power moves, the symposium was its intellectual cousin, a gathering where the focus wasn't on status or alliances, but on philosophical discussions, deep thinking, and the pursuit of wisdom. Sure, there was still plenty of food and wine, but here, the main course was conversation. It was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the wine, and the goal wasn't just to impress with your wealth, but with the depth of your thoughts. At a symposium, the setup was a little different. Rather than sitting upright at a table, participants would recline on couches, enjoying their food and wine in a relaxed, almost meditative setting. Reclining was a way of signaling that the purpose of the gathering was intellectual exchange, not just eating and drinking. Picture a group of men lying back, sipping their wine, while waxing philosophical about the meaning of love, justice, and the nature of the universe. It's a bit like a modern-day debate club, only with more lounging and better snacks. The symposiarch, or leader of the symposium, had the important job of guiding the flow of conversation. They were responsible for keeping the balance between wine and wisdom. Too much wine, and the discussion might turn into a drunken brawl over who had the best beard in Athens. Too little, and the conversation might lack that special spark that comes when people feel just tipsy enough to share their deepest thoughts. Symposia were often more exclusive than the average banquet. You didn't just show up at a symposium. You had to be invited by someone who thought you were worth engaging in intellectual debate. And once you were there, you were expected to contribute. This wasn't a place for passive listening. You had to bring your A-game to the table, whether that was debating the ethics of war, discussing the concept of beauty, or dissecting the latest philosophical trends. Wine, of course, still played an essential role. But in a symposium, it wasn't about getting drunk. It was about reaching the perfect state of mind where ideas could flow freely, uninhibited by social constraints. The Greeks believed that wine, in moderation, helped to open the soul, allowing for deeper reflection and more meaningful discussions. It was, in many ways, a tool for unlocking the truth. At the heart of the symposium was the idea that intellectual conversation could be just as nourishing as food. For the Greeks, this was the ultimate form of human connection, engaging with others not through material wealth or political favors, but through the shared pursuit of wisdom. So while the feasts were for power plays, the symposium was for the mind. And in ancient Greece, that might have been the greatest show of status of all. Women and banquets. When we think of ancient Greek banquets, the image that often comes to mind is one dominated by men. Powerful figures gathered around, discussing politics and philosophy over elaborate meals and endless goblets of wine. And for the most part, that image is accurate. In cities like Athens, women were largely excluded from these gatherings, expected to remain in the shadows while the men engaged in their grand social rituals. But, like all things in history, there are exceptions to the rule. In some parts of Greece, notably Sparta, women were more actively involved in banquets and social gatherings. Spartan women had a reputation for being outspoken and even influential in the male-dominated society. It wasn't uncommon for them to attend banquets where their voices could carry weight in the discussions. However, this was more the exception than the norm. In Athens, for example, respectable women, particularly wives, were expected to stay out of sight when the men gathered for their feasts. But there was a notable group of women who did participate in these events, the hetairai. Unlike wives who were expected to remain demure and largely uninvolved in public life, hetairai were high-class courtesans who played a significant role in social and intellectual circles. These women were educated, articulate, and skilled in the art of conversation. They were not merely present for their beauty or companionship. They were also there to engage with men on topics like politics, philosophy, and art. The hetairai occupied a unique and somewhat controversial position in Greek society. On one hand, they were respected for their intellect and their ability to participate in the kinds of discussions usually reserved for men. On the other hand, they were marginalized because of their profession. Unlike wives, who were meant to embody modesty and domestic virtue, hetairai were free to express themselves more openly and interact with men on an equal footing, at least in social settings. It's important to note that while the hetairai could engage in intellectual conversations and sometimes held considerable influence over powerful men, they were still viewed through the lens of their societal role. They lived in a space between respect and marginalization, admired for their wit and intelligence, yet never fully accepted into the upper echelons of Greek society. While women's participation in banquets was limited, the presence of hetairai highlights how certain women were able to, through education, charisma, and strategic social positioning, they carved out a space for themselves in the intellectual and social life of ancient Greece. It may not have been the full equality we think of today, but in their own way, they were trailblazers. The symbolism of food. In ancient Greece, food wasn't just about nourishment. It carried deep symbolic meaning. Every dish served at a banquet had its own story, its own connection to tradition, culture, and the gods. For the Greeks, food was intertwined with the divine, with offerings made to the gods before anyone took a bite. After all, no one wanted to risk angering Zeus by skipping his portion of the feast. Every meal began with a gesture of respect to the deities, reinforcing the belief that the abundance on the table was a gift from the heavens. Take the bread, for example. Simple, ubiquitous, yet deeply symbolic. Bread represented life itself, the sustenance that allowed communities to thrive. It wasn't just a staple food. It was a reminder of survival, continuity, and the agricultural cycle that sustained society. By serving bread, the host wasn't just feeding his guests, he was honoring the lifeblood of the community. Then there was wine, the drink of both celebration and chaos. To the Greeks, wine wasn't merely a beverage to accompany food. It was a powerful symbol of joy, release, and the delicate balance between order and disorder. Drinking wine could unite people in festivity, but it could also, if overindulged, lead to disaster. The Greeks revered wine for its ability to reveal a person's true nature, often saying that under its influence, people showed their truest selves, whether that was a blessing or a curse. In many cases, the specific dishes served at a banquet also reflected the host's respect for tradition and the gods. Meat, particularly, had a special connection to the divine. Animals were often sacrificed to the gods, and the best portions were offered up before the feast began. This was more than just ritualistic. It was a way of ensuring that the gods remained pleased, watching over the community with favor. Every meal had a sacred quality, a bond between the mortal and the immortal. The symbolism of food extended beyond religious offerings. Different foods could also signify the status and character of the host. Serving rare or exotic ingredients wasn't just about showing off wealth. It was about displaying the host's connection to far-reaching trade networks and influence. The variety and quality of the food on offer could elevate the host's reputation in the eyes of the guests, subtly reminding them of his power and social standing. In many ways, the food served at banquets was a metaphor for life in ancient Greece, a blend of practicality, tradition, and deeper meaning. It nourished the body, but it also nourished social ties, religious devotion, and political ambition. Every bite carried the weight of history, religion, and societal expectation, making each meal a meaningful experience, far beyond simple sustenance. Banquets and politics. Banquets in ancient Greece weren't just social events. They were political battlegrounds, cleverly disguised as meals. If you think major political decisions were only made in the halls of government, think again. Many of the most important alliances, deals, and even conspiracies in Greek history were crafted far from public view, over a table laden with food and wine. The informal setting of a banquet provided the perfect cover for leaders to talk freely, strike deals, and occasionally betray each other, all under the guise of camaraderie and celebration. Imagine a grand hall filled with rival politicians, military leaders, and influential citizens, all pretending to enjoy a meal together. On the surface, it's just another feast, but beneath the smiles and toasts, there's a palpable undercurrent of competition. Rivalries between city-states, power struggles within cities, and political maneuvering all played out here, just as much as they did in the public assembly. And in some cases, more so. The informality of the banquet was key to its political power. Unlike the structured and often performative atmosphere of the assembly, banquets allowed for more intimate and honest conversati. Leaders could let their guard down, just a little, under the influence of good food and wine, and it's in those moments of relaxation that critical decisions were often made. Treaties were negotiated, wars were plotted, and alliances were sealed over the course of a single evening. Of course, it helped that the wine often loosened tongues, revealing intentions that might otherwise remain hidden. The structure of the banquet also lent itself to political maneuvering. The seating arrangements, as mentioned earlier, reflected social hierarchies, but they also influenced political alliances. Who you sat next to could determine the course of your evening, and perhaps the course of your political future. Proximity to the host or to influential figures wasn't just about prestige, it was about access. A well-timed conversation with the right person could mean the difference between political success and failure. Banquets also provided the perfect opportunity for Connie. Away from the prying eyes of the public, rivals could plot in secret, knowing that whatever they said over the meal wouldn't leave the room. And while the toasts and laughter might have seemed genuine, there was always the possibility that behind every smile, a betrayal was brewing. Take, for example, the peace treaties between city-states. While the official agreements were signed in public, the real negotiations often took place in private banquets, where leaders could speak candidly, away from the pressures of public scrutiny. And these weren't just casual discussions. What happened at these feasts could determine the fate of entire cities. But politics at the banquet wasn't all about secrecy and plotting. There were also opportunities for genuine diplomacy. A banquet offered a chance for leaders to connect on a personal level, to build relationships that could transcend political rivalries. Even in the midst of tense negotiations, a shared meal could foster trust, or at least the appearance of it. In the end, the banquet was a space where food, wine, and conversation came together to shape the course of Greek history. Alliances were forged, enemies were made, and the fate of nations was decided, all between bites of roast lamb and sips of the finest wine, music, dance, and fellowship. No Greek banquet would be complete without the rich sounds of music and the flowing movements of dance. These elements were not just optional extras, they were essential components that elevated a simple gathering into a full celebration of life, art, and fellowship. Music and dance brought the feast to life, setting the mood and helping to express the emotions that words couldn't always capture. If the food and wine were the body of the banquet, then music and dance were its soul. From the moment guests entered the hall, they were greeted by the gentle strumming of the lyre and the melodic tunes of the aulos, a double-reeded instrument that added a hypnotic atmosphere to the gathering. These sounds weren't just background noise. They dictated the tempo of the night. Early in the evening, the music was soft, almost meditative, allowing guests to ease into conversation while enjoying their first bites. But as the night wore on and the wine flowed more freely, the music would grow livelier, coaxing even the most reserved guests to loosen up. And then there was the dance. In ancient Greece, dance was much more than a form of entertainment. It was a way of expressing communal joy, reverence for the gods, and even personal emotions. Some dances were part of religious rituals, deeply tied to the gods being honored during the banquet. Other times they were purely celebratory, a way for the guests to throw caution to the wind and revel in the pleasure of the evening. One of the most popular forms of dance was the Pyrrhic, a martial dance that mimicked the movements of warriors in battle. While it was a form of entertainment, it also had a deeper significance. It reminded everyone present of the importance of martial prowess and the warrior ethos that underpinned Greek society. Even in moments of celebration, there was a nod to the ever-present possibility of war and the need to be ready for it. But not all the dances were so serious. As the evening progressed, more festive and spontaneous dances would break out, with guests joining in, sometimes clumsily, sometimes gracefully, as they moved to the beat of the music. These moments of uninhibited joy were where the boundaries between social classes, rivals, and allies briefly dissolved, and everyone simply enjoyed the shared experience of being alive. The role of music and dance went beyond mere entertainment. It helped to foster a sense of community. In a society where rivalries and political tensions often ran high, the shared enjoyment of music and dance provided a rare moment of unity. For a few hours, even the most bitter enemies could be found dancing side by side, lost in the rhythm of the music and the warmth of the feast. Music also served as a backdrop to some of the most profound moments of the banquet. As the night wound down, the tone of the evening would shift once again, with softer, more reflective music playing, as the conversations deepened. This was when the true fellowship of the banquet emerged. The earlier political maneuvering and status games faded into the background, and the guests were left with the simple pleasure of being in each other's company. In these quieter moments, friendships were solidified, and guests would leave the banquet not just with full bellies, but with renews. The music and dance had served their purpose, not just to entertain, but to connect. And so a Greek banquet was more than just a feast for the senses. It was a celebration of life itself, with every note, every step, and every shared laugh adding to the rich tapestry of human connection.
When life's challenges come my way, paused and soft, I'll be ready for that day. Very calm, echoing the voice, but still close. Strength and wisdom by my side. Intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide. Intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today. Because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.